you and I became acquainted because of the anti-war activism, and also I knew of you, of course, because of Assange, and also your deep and lasting friendship with Roger Waters. And we have some mutual friends, and you decided to go find out what, because Western media has really vilified Russia for a long period of time now. It's been a program that the State Departments and DOJ has been working on, particularly under the Biden administration. So what were your first impressions of Moscow when you got there? And what were some of the myths that got dispelled for you
Well,
as a Westerner going
you're
there?
one of the hidden hands of me going over there. Okay, just want people to know that. I went over there. We spoke about this, and what I saw over there in Moscow, just Moscow alone. I'll talk
Mm-hmm.
about the other part of the country later.
Mm-hmm.
But Moscow was an incredible city, a beautiful city, a shining city on the hill. I was driving today from from Albany to New York, and it was potholes every 20 feet. All right, down there are no potholes. You can go to the airport from downtown Moscow, and that's like DME. That's like an hour and a half trip, and there's not one pothole. The city is immaculate, it's clean, and it's on fire. And you would think, with all of these pop-ups that I get from Newsweek and other U.S. state media affiliated organizations, that I would be seeing bread lines, or I would be seeing soup kitchens, or people selling apples. Totally the opposite. The place is on fire. The sanctions have backfired. People are doing well in Moscow. Everybody's working. The traffic is unbelievable, and the roads are beautiful. And every cafe and restaurant that I went to, and I had the freedom to go wherever I wanted. There was nobody looking over my shoulder. I went to nightclubs, and over a couple of week period of time, and it totally destroyed this narrative that Moscow is in Russia is having a some kind of economic downfall, and that includes in Rostov, which is on the eastern border, where I went before I went to Donetsk and Mariupol.
That's amazing. The way, and I've heard from my friend Fee, who's she's a correspondent over for RT. She talks a lot about the mass transit because she just uses that every day for work and for, living in Moscow. How did you find the subways and
Oh my God. I took the subway today from here to my radio show in
right?
Brooklyn. I took the A train. There are
Mhm.
rats on both sides of the track. The
Oh boy.
walls are dirty.
Mhm.
The floors are filthy. And the subways there are like you could eat off the floor like fried eggs.
Wow.
And there's no advertising. They're beautiful. They're like, you go to uh, Penn Station or Grand
Right.
Central, you see the high ceilings. It's
Mhm.
beautiful there. Well, that's at every station. And I took the mass transit there all the time. You know why? Because there was too much traffic, because the city is busy, and you get there every 90 seconds. There's a subway train every 90 seconds at the most. I got off a train, and 40 seconds later, there was another train going in the same direction. So the subway system is impeccable, and it's like being in the Metropolitan Museum. Each stop, the way the chandeliers and the ceilings, and I've never seen anything like it. And the like I said, the roads are
Mhm.
so clean. I've never seen roads clean like this. I've never seen roads without potholes, but in Moscow, there are roads without potholes.
Right. That's really amazing. And I've heard the same thing from several people that we have a very skewed vision of what Moscow is really like. And I guess I wanted to ask you too about the food. One of the things that Fee talked about was that it tastes different. It has less chemicals. So how did you find it?
I found the food great. I had borscht. I don't like borscht in general, but the borscht there was so good. The food was so wonderful. And I went to this place called the Depot, which has a craft beer, uh, stand there because because of the embargo, there's no craft beers coming in from outside of the country, so they developed their own craft beer culture. And not just that, the food at this place, Depot, which was jammed, and I've got videos of it, jammed, and they have what you would call prime aged meat. You have like plav, the best plav in the world. You have the best seafood in the world, and you have all of these stands selling retail food in these stalls, and I've never seen anything like it in the U.S. How beautiful the Depot food court is. I wish there was one place in New York that could replicate what I saw there. Seriously.
Right. Well, one of my favorite video clips that I saw on your Twitter handle, which is, if people want to find you, I think it's at Credico. What is
Credico
your
Randy.
right?
Credico Randy.
Um,
Don't do
so
Randy Credico because that account has been stolen from me.
so when one of my favorites was when you were sitting in Red Square and you were smoking a cigar and you just looked very happy.
I
And
was. I was so. It was so. It was spiritual to be in Red Square and sitting
right.
there and talking to people who don't hate Americans. They have no animosity
Yeah,
towards.
I wanted to ask you about that, Randy, because there's so much Rusophobia. It's been so, driven, like Rachel Maddow screeching in people's living rooms for 6 years. And then like last week you had the Boston Marathon where Russian athletes and Belarus athletes were banned from being able to participate. There's such bigotry and bias and racism against Russia. It's just unreal in the West.
Yeah.
How do they treat Americans when Americans go there?
They're very. For me, they were very gracious. I sat at the bar at the Marriott Hotel, and they said that the perception that you are getting is a complete falsehood. And but they didn't blame the American people. They have
Mhm.
no animosity. They have no baleful feelings towards Americans. They like Americans, and they can't believe the false impression that is being portrayed by Western media. But that being said, they were very good with me, and I had an open mind. There were no other journalists that I knew of that were participating in this kind of activity. And then going into Donetsk and Mariupol, there was none at all. They were all going west, like this Wall Street Journal reporter was
Mhm.
not going to the war zone where I went. He was going west to
Yeah.
expose Russian frailties and possible new weapon systems. So there was nobody going east. I mean west from where I was in Moscow to Mariupol or to Donetsk. And I got to tell you something. It was a very frightening experience being in Donetsk. That there were Heimer missiles that had passed us and hit other areas. It could have hit us. I was scared out of my wits the entire time. But I lived through it. I don't know how those people do it, but I can tell you this: they are not going back. They are not submitting to the old guard and the Azov battalions and all these other neo-Nazi groups that are stationed around Donetsk. and
And
Mariupol.
just to educate some of maybe the audience that may not have this in context, you, Randy, went down to the Donbass region, which has been getting shelled by the Kiev regime in Ukraine, by Zelensky. His military since 2014 has been shelled almost daily, to the point of
No, daily, not almost daily. When I was there, it was
And
daily. They were hitting open air markets, only civilian population areas, the open air markets, the university there, the church, the Russian Orthodox Church. That's where they were hitting, and this is
these Ukrainian militias are killing and aiming at civilians and civilian.
only. No, there's
these
no.
are war
The only
crimes.
time I felt safe when I was in a in a meeting with military commanders when I was there, because they weren't hitting that target; they were hitting civilian targets. I was in a restaurant that was 3 floors, and I was very scared because you don't know where to stand when you are there. They are deliberately trying to strike fear in the local population, not so much the military, because they're not going to beat the military. There's no chance that Ukraine is going to win a battle in either Donetsk or Mariupol. That's over. That's land that's never going to be ceded back to Ukraine, which never should have had it to begin with.
And you bring up a good point, and I think our audience should know about the fear that's being struck into that population, which is mostly identifies Russian nationals. The language is Russian, and also the Russian Orthodox Church. So not only is the language being outlawed by the Kiev regime, the Russian language, but also the Russian Orthodox Church, and there's been violence towards the church itself, and monks and nuns arrested. Can you talk a little bit about what you saw and what people were telling you when you were there?
When I was in Mariupol, and I befriended this 19-year-old girl. She could have been my granddaughter. And what she said was that Zelensky was a Nazi comedian, and that she went back. She had friends and family that were, I think you may have a video of her, Valeria, that she was standing strong, and she was standing with them until the very bitter end. She had a makeshift cafe. She made pizza for me and some other like French journalists. And no matter where I went, the resolve of the Russian people, which control those areas, they're Russian. In fact, all of Ukraine, let's be honest, is Russian. They all. Yeah. I said to somebody, I said, those Ukrainians are good fighters, and he said, of course, they're Russian. So there is no such thing as a Ukrainian. That's an entire myth that was created, the state that was carved out for better or worse. But the people there are not going to yield to the violence that the U.S. is supporting. The Heimers, they live with it the same way I live in New York. And I know there's going to be 4 or 5 people pushed into the subway tonight. And maybe last night, 8 people killed in the Bronx or in Brooklyn. But I live here anyway, regardless. And so people have that attitude. They are going to live, and they're going to fight. And if it means giving up their life, they've had so many friends who have died because of these Azov battalions coming in there, trying to suppress the culture and the history of what really is Russia. The DPR, the Donetsk People's Republic, is part of Russia. Donbass is part of Russia. You go to this monument in Donbass. The first thing I did when I arrived in an armored car, I was in an armored car, the red zone and the yellow zone and then the green zone, into this area where there's this beautiful monument for those who gave up their lives fighting against Nazis in 1943, 1944 in a tank battle. It's called Sour Magila. And on the other side of the hill, there's a number of monuments dedicated to those that fought against the Azov Battalion, these neo-Nazis, and everyone wants to dismiss the fact that there are neo-Nazis, there are Nazis, their brethren, the people they look up to are people like Stepan Bandera, who was responsible for 33,000 Jews being killed in Ukraine and 100,000 Poles. And so these are people that fought against that in 2014 when they invaded Donbass. They were able, 17 people were able to repel these 2 battalions there. And so you have this monument, the most incredible monument I've ever seen in my life. And that includes the one with Abraham Lincoln.
That's amazing. And thank you for sharing some of that. And we've been sharing some of the pictures and videos as you've been talking on the live show. One of the fun things about being on the live show is that there's a little audience interaction. So sometimes we're able to get comments or questions. So Reef, did you want to raise up any questions for Randy right now that came through?
Let me look. We've got Bricks versus West. There's a new Grand Central Station that just opened up, built under the old one, apparently. And someone asks, is there any signed documents that Ukraine is even a nation?
No,
Randy?
it's never been a nation. It's not a nation. Khrushchev gave over, he was from Ukraine, but Ukraine is more of an ideology. It's all Russian. These are Russians fighting Russians. There are no such thing as a Ukrainian. Ukrainians are Russian. It was called Rus for thousands of years. And to think that it's some kind of like independent nation is ludicrous. And, I can be accused of being prejudicial to Russia, but it's historically, it's the truth. There is no such thing as Ukraine. Ukraine was never, something out of 1926, 27. They gave it over and called it Ukraine, but it really is not a separate nation. And I spoke to a 2.5-hour interview with a gentleman who was the head of emergency management in Kiev in 2014. He is Ukrainian. He left and went back to Donetsk. He was very upset by the treatment of Russians in Kiev and the attacks in Donetsk and Mariupol by these Azov neo-Nazi organizations. He was very upset. He is Ukrainian. And so that video interview will be coming out in the next couple of weeks. It was 2.5 hours, but he saw what was happening. He knew it was a coup and the violence that ensued after the coup against those who oppose the coup and those who oppose the hegemony in Donetsk and Mariupol was so upsetting to him that he didn't switch sides, but he's telling the truth. And I have that 2.5-hour interview coming up in the next couple of days.
Yeah, and I think for our audience too, if they have other questions about history, because you have a really good grasp of it, is to follow your content, but also to watch Igor Lopatynyk, who's the director of Ukraine on Fire, in the Oliver Stone film. But Ukraine on Fire really lays out, and then there's several films after, but you can get it. It was banned on YouTube for a while, but you can get it on Rumble. You can get it on other places. Now it's come back. But one thing I wanted to also kind of go into with you, Randy, was that I've been, because we have some mutual friends, like I said, but I also have friends and family and, things. So I kind of know what's going on over there a bit. And one thing that is happening is the Russians are rebuilding some of these areas. So did you get to see any of the rebuilding and what was going on there?
In Mariupol, I was totally astounded because it looked like Dresden. because there's a thing called the Azovstal, where there's this big steel factory that goes down 4 or 5 floors. They were shelling in Mariupol, and the place looked like Dresden, 1944, 1945. So, but as I was leaving, they took me, the French journalists I was with, to an area where there were like, I think 8 new apartment buildings. Mm-hmm. Every 3 months, they come up with these units. Can you imagine that in New York? These are what the Mohawks did at Empire State Building back in 1932. The rapidity of building these new units. And these are Central Asian from the Caucasus that are not slaves. They're walking around. They're I got to talk to many of them, and they're highly paid, but they are incredible construction workers. So they are building apace these new units in Donbass and in Mariupol, and trying to and then actually retrofitting the buildings that are still surviving the attacks from the Azovstal, which were getting advice from NATO members in the Azovstal, just pounding these areas where the Russians came in to liberate it from the thrall of the Azov battalions. And I mean, and everyone I spoke to, I spoke to people that lost their homes, that were shelled by the Azov battalions, and people taken captive and used as hostages.
Oh my goodness.
Keep the Russians from liberating the area. They don't want to be part of Ukraine at all. They don't want to be part of it, of Ukraine. And especially now, if you look at the damage that has been inflicted on Mariupol, you will understand why the people there are now coming back. They're part of this rebuilding process. And if you go from where I was, which is the Donetsk city, down to Mariupol, 50 or 60 miles, there are fields to the right and to the left that are nothing but these IEDs, these explosives out there that the Ukrainians have put out there. So if the car that I was in, which was an armored car, had slipped off the road, we would have been into a minefield that the Azov groups had planted in the road towards, and they're trying to demine it right now. It's not an easy thing to do.
No, it's not. Now, are you aware of the pedal bombs? I had.
That's what I'm talking about. The pedal bombs. I'm really talking. I didn't think of it, but it's the pedal bombs. These are pedal bombs all over, going into Mariupol, that were put there by the Azov battalion or Randy.
Yeah, and to further illustrate to my audience, I don't know if some of the people that follow me may have saw the Ava Bartlett episode, but unfortunately they look very benign from the outside. When you see them, they're small, even look.
Please don't eat the daisies.
Yeah, don't eat the daisies. But children, unfortunately, play with them or step on them. I wish that they were banned. And now the UK has sent uranium.
Depleted
uranium. So could you hear anything about that while you were there, or since you've been back, as far as what's going on with that? Because at first they weren't going to do it, and then they did, and now what's happening?
I think it's infuriated. They are not giving up. People in Donetsk and the people of Mariupol, and the chorus I always heard was, how do we stop this and get this over with, short of using nuclear weapons? So people think, now I'm talking about commanders saying that to me. I was in some high level meetings that they're not going east. They are staying in the West. And so if Biden and the nutcases, the Dr. Strangeloves around him, Victoria Nuland, and Jake
Vindman.
Sullivan and Tony
They're
Blinken.
insane.
They're risking our lives. They're risking the survival of the world to try to recapture this area. It's not going to happen. It will not happen. And if they have to, I know they are in an existential mode right now, Russia. And so if you were in existential mode and the only thing you had to deter the likelihood of being exited out of life were nuclear weapons, you would use them.
Right. I have to be honest, my bias here is this. And Randy, you know me, I'm an author. I'm a person that speaks out about this, a commentator, a geopolitical analyst, if you will. My background is in international relations and that kind of thing, and having my law degree and doing, and analyzing and writing and doing all this.
You have an impeccable background.
Speaking out with Biden, but from my perspective, Vladimir Putin kept us from a nuclear confrontation a couple of times. Like in Syria, when things were really bad and things could have escalated out of control, he did some really good maneuvers there. I mean, he's
much more reserved. He's much more restrained than this president.
He is. And they keep saying they want a different leader. But what I would say to them is, I don't think you do, because you don't know what will happen if you do. And he has shown tremendous patience.
He's got 80% support. Our president here, Biden, this zombie, has 20% support. So what platform is he running on to bring back this neocon combo to escalate the conflict in Ukraine? I mean, what does he have to offer?